which they had mistakenly left behind at Camp 4. Communication became impossible. Hours passed with no word from the pair, and by late afternoon, they were nowhere to be found. A search team from 8K Expeditions was immediately dispatched to try and locate them. But it wasn't until days later that they found their bodies in separate locations on the southeast ridge of Everest, the very path they had ascended only hours before. One had collapsed while trying to make it down. The other had caved into exhaustion and the merciless conditions of the descent. The mountain had stolen their triumph, turning it into tragedy. The recovery of their bodies was logistically challenging. The dangerous conditions and narrow weather windows made it nearly impossible to safely bring them down from such an extreme altitude. Out of respect for the climbers' families, the Sherpas retrieved their mobile phones, which contained their last summit photos. The phones were later sent to their families in Kathmandu for closure. These phones contained summit pictures that confirmed both climbers had reached the top of Everest, a bittersweet moment. Sherpa searchers eventually chose to move their bodies off the main route to ensure the safety of other climbers. Bringing the bodies down the mountain proved too dangerous, but it eventually happened on May 25th. Usuk Jargal was a father of 3 and one of Mongolia's most celebrated mountaineers. He was known not just for his strength, but for his deep connection to the mountains. He had spent years leading expeditions across the world, yet it was Everest that had always loomed large in his dreams. He had spoken many times about the honor of representing Mongolia at such heights. Purev Surin, too, had only recently begun climbing at this level. A talented and ambitious mountaineer, he followed Usuk Jargal's lead, probably inspired by his passion for the sport. Their bond had been one of mutual respect and admiration, a shared goal of bringing Mongolia into the global mountaineering spotlight. For those who knew them, the loss was devastating. Back home in Mongolia, their deaths hit hard. They had brought attention to the growing mountaineering community there. While these stories ended tragically, they're symbols of bravery. These climbers dared to dream, to push the boundaries of human endurance. And while Everest claimed their lives, it did not erase their legacy. They reached the top of the world. That much can never be taken from them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave. Jimmy Chin and a National Geographic's team were returning from Everest in late September 2024 when they made a shocking discovery. As Jimmy would go on to say, "We were all literally running in circles dropping F-bombs." This find has been compared to the search for Amelia Earhart or Michael Rockefeller, and it gives us some small clues into the greatest mountain climbing mystery of all time. Today we cover tragedy, mystery, and the weird role of global warming to give us the answers we've been looking for in the past 100 years. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It all started in the early years of World War I. What began as a regional conflict has exploded into the deadliest battle mankind has ever seen. Both Allied and Central powers are locked in a brutal struggle to gain any edge they can. And with warplanes just making their debut, aviation looks like the only way to surprise the enemy and shift the tides. The Germans were quick to act on this. They developed a revolutionary synchronization device. It allowed them to mount heavy machine guns on aircraft that could fire precisely between the rotating propeller blades without shredding their own planes. It was a game changer, letting them unleash a deadly rain of bullets on both ground troops and enemy planes. The Allies were left scrambling, hoping to find something to even the odds. Soon enough, they'd get what they were looking for. One random day in the year 1915, the British War Office in Birkenhead, Cheshire, received an unexpected envelope. Inside were 2 detailed designs that caught their attention. One was the blueprint for a synchronization device of their own, and the other suggested a design for a gyroscopic stabilizer to steady aircraft and improve precision in combat maneuvers. Though the designs intrigued everyone, the person behind them was even more shocking. It wasn't a military genius or an aviation expert, but a teenage boy with an unusual talent for mechanics. Andrew Common Irvine, better known to his family as Sandy. While there is no record of the British forces using Sandy's designs directly, Their innovation hinted at his extraordinary potential. This was a child destined for something extraordinary. A fate that, as it would turn out, was both brilliant and heartbreakingly brief. Over 100 years before Jimmy Chin's shocking discovery on Mount Everest, Sandy Irvine's extraordinary life began. Born in Birkenhead in 1902, Sandy was a naturally curious and hands-on child from day one. His father, William Ferguson Irvine, was a historian, but unlike his dad's love for library shelves and academic lectures, Sandy took after his mother's mechanical interests. She was ahead of her time, having designed a washing machine prototype before World War I. Since his childhood, books weren't exactly Sandy's best friends, probably because he had a learning issue like dyslexia that no one really picked up on. But give him numbers or an engine to fix, and he'd blow everyone away. He was the kind of kid who'd take things apart just to see if he could put them back together, leaving a trail of parts around the house that drove his mom up the wall. But deep inside, she always knew there was something special about him. Sports were his other big thing. A few years after his innovative plane design stunned many, he gained attention again as a standout rower, playing a key role in an impressive Royal Shrewsbury School Boat Club victory. Just 2 years later, he got into Merton College, Oxford, to study engineering, and finally started making strides academically. He also joined the Oxford University Mountaineering Club and the rowing crew, helping Oxford pull off a rare win in the 1923 Oxford-Cambridge boat race, which was the only win Oxford had in 3 decades. Later that year, he joined the Merton College Arctic expedition to Spitsbergen, which marked a turning point in his life. Sandy became the highlight of the trip, excelling in every aspect and quickly earning a reputation for his ability to stay productive and resourceful, especially when it came to handling equipment in tough conditions. The leader of this expedition was a geologist and mountaineer, Noel Odell. When Sandy met him, they quickly realized they'd actually crossed paths before. 4 years earlier, Noel and his wife Mona were on a trekking trip to a 3,000-foot mountain in Wales called Fôl Grach. There they had a brief run-in with Sandy, when he surprised them by riding his motorcycle up to the top, while they had hiked up on foot. So, when Noel saw Sandy again, he didn't want to miss the chance, and he immediately invited him to join the upcoming British Mount Everest expedition. In his recommendation to the organizing team, Noel described the 21-year-old as a big, strong guy with broad shoulders and light legs. He even called him a Superman, thinking he'd be a huge asset to the campaign. Noel himself was the oxygen officer for the British Mount Everest expedition and had already been part of earlier attempts to conquer the mountain. By 1924, this was Britain's 3rd try to reach the summit of the world's highest peak. The first 2 attempts in 1921 and 1922 didn't get anywhere, and the second one even left the financial blow of around $3,000, which, if you adjust for inflation, was like burning through $56,000 today. That loss forced the organizing team to delay the 3rd expedition for an entire year, but when they finally returned in 1924, they were determined to plant their flag on top of the world this time. Climbing Everest back then wasn't anything like the modern-day adventure it's become. Forget the fancy gear or mapped-out trails. This was pure exploration. The mountain itself was uncharted territory, and the now standard southern pathway wasn't even an option, because it cut through Nepal, which at the time was off-limits to Westerners due to political restrictions. That left the north face of the mountain as the only viable way up. However, it was a track mountaineers describe as one where a single slip could mean certain death. To take on this challenging climb and establish a route, the expedition team had brought in a man known for his unmatched strength and a poetic obsession with Everest, George Mallory. George sharpened his climbing skills while working as a schoolteacher, but the outbreak of World War I forced him to put his passion for the mountains on hold. After coming back from the war, he tried returning to teaching but quickly realized it wasn't for him anymore. So, when the chance to join the first ever British expedition to Everest came knocking in 1921, he quit his job immediately and went all in on his dream. During that first expedition, George and his team mapped out the main route to the summit through the North Col and North Ridge. The following year, on the second expedition, they made history by climbing to a staggering 27,300 feet, using supplemental oxygen, and even got Olympic gold medals for alpinism. Like Noel, George was on his third expedition and came fully prepared, with all the right skills for the job. Along with him, Noel and Sandy, the team had 12 members and 60 porters to help them get to the top. On February 29, 1924, George left Liverpool for the Himalayas on a ship, joined by 3 other expedition members, including Sandy. By the end of March, everyone was finally at the prep camps and the journey to Everest kicked off. They followed the same route to the base of the mountain as before, taking another month to acclimatize and adjust along the way. By April 29th, they made it to base camp at the glacier end of the Rongbuk Valley. The conditions had been pretty decent up until that point, but as soon as they arrived, snow and bad weather moved in. After settling in, the team planned their camp locations. Back then, climbers had to build each camp as they went, and the spots they used were different from what we see today. George mapped out their route, planning to hit camps 1, 2, and 3 after leaving base camp, with a goal of reaching the North Col checkpoint at 23,000 feet, where they'd set up Camp 4 just below it. From there, they'd break into smaller groups and try to summit over several days. By the first week of May, the expedition reached the location for Camp 3, but the weather turned and a heavy snowstorm stopped them in their tracks. Once it cleared up a bit, they finally made it to Camp 4 by May 21st. But the weather went south again, and some of the porters and team members got sick and had to head back to Camp 1. In that situation, they gave 15 of the strongest and most skilled porters the title of Tigers to lift their spirits and get them ready for the toughest part of the climb. The 1922 British expedition marked the first time supplemental oxygen was used in mountaineering. However, because it was a new attempt, they ran into some issues with the process. Experts worked on these issues over the next 2 years and brought improved equipment for this expedition. But still, the gear wasn't very reliable, and not everyone in the group agreed on whether to use it. Sandy quickly became a resource in this situation. He made some big improvements to the oxygen sets, making them lighter, stronger, and easier to use, all while keeping an eye out for repairs. He also looked after the expedition's cameras, camp beds, stoves, and other gear. In just a few days, the 21-year-old undergrad became well-liked and respected by his older and much more experienced teammates. George Mallory even joked to his wife that Sandy could handle just about anything, except maybe a conversation. After about a week at Camp 4, George and his fellow climber, John Jeffrey Bruce, decided to make the first summit attempt of the expedition on June 1st. Their plan was to leave Camp 4, set up Camps 5 and 6 along the way, and then push for the summit before heading back to Camp 4 again, because it was safer there with giant ice walls shielding them from extreme winds. With 9 Tiger porters by their side and hopes for clear weather, the team set out to conquer the peak. But as soon as they left the shelter of Camp 4 walls, fierce, icy winds hit them hard along the ridges. They had to respond to the circumstances. 4 of the 9 porters abandoned their loads and turned back before they even reached the spot for Camp 5. Despite this setback, George and Bruce kept going and eventually set up Camp 5 at 25,200 feet. But the next day, things only got worse. 3 more porters refused to continue because of the intense conditions, and the entire team had to turn back halfway up to their planned spot for Camp 6 at 26,800 feet. On their way back, George and John ran into 2 other team members, Edward Norton and Howard Somerville, who were just beginning their summit attempt. Edward and Howard climbed without supplemental oxygen, accompanied by 6 Tiger porters. But when they saw George and John returning unsuccessful, they started to question their own chances. At first, things went smoothly for them, but after setting up Camp 6, Howard started feeling seriously ill, forcing Edward to go on alone. He reached a new world record altitude of 28,126 feet, coming just 900 feet from the summit, before he had to turn back due to extreme exhaustion. While this was a new record in altitude, The summit attempt had still failed, but the climbers weren't ready to give up. And with time running out before the monsoon snows, the team only had one more shot at the summit. So they decided to send their best men for the job, and George was once again the obvious choice. He needed a partner for the summit, and while everyone expected him to pick Noel O'Dell, George made the surprising call to choose Sandy instead. The exact reason for this choice is still unclear, but experts think George might have believed that if the previous attempt had used supplemental oxygen, they would have reached the top. So, not only did he decide to use oxygen this time, but he also picked Sandy for his expertise with the equipment. Whatever the reason, George and Sandy set off for their summit attempt on June 6th at 8:40 a.m., along with 8 porters. By the end of the next day, they had made it to Camp 6, ready for their final push. Noel O'Dell was playing a supporting role, so he took a photo of George and Sandy before they left. That photo ended up being the last close-up picture of them alive. On June 7th, Noel went to Camp 5 where some porters who had helped George and Sandy at Camp 6 came back with 2 handwritten notes, one for him and the other for the photographer John Noel. The note to him included their usual whereabouts, while the letter to the photographer mentioned that if the weather was good, he might be able to catch a shot of George and Sandy either crossing the rock band under the pyramid or heading up the skyline by 8 a.m. the next day. John was told to keep an eye on that area with the camera ready from the lookout he had set up at Camp 3. The next morning, John remained at the camera and telescope from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m., 2 hours after they were supposed to reach the spot. Even though the weather was clear, he didn't see them. After 10 a.m., a sudden whiteout blocked the view, and he couldn't see anything anymore. Meanwhile, up around 26,000 feet, Noel was scanning the ridge too, hoping to catch sight of George and Sandy. Around 12:50 p.m., he climbed over a rocky ledge and spotted them as 2 tiny black dots making their way along a snowy trail beneath a steep section of the ridge. One dot seemed to move toward the other. When the first dot reached the top of the ridge, Noel wasn't sure if the second one made it up too. Noel wrote in his diary, "Saw M. G. Mallory and I, A. Irvine, on the ridge, nearing base of Final Pyramid." That simple statement later became the biggest point of controversy in this entire expedition, turning what should have been a straightforward observation into a mystery that had people arguing for decades. Noel couldn't pin down exactly where he'd seen them. At first, he said by base of the Final Pyramid, he meant they were near the 3rd step, which is remarkably high up on the mountain and close to the summit. But his fellow climbers weren't so sure they could have made it that far so quickly. So, Noel changed his story and said they were actually near the 2nd step, which was a bit lower, but one of the hardest and time-consuming spots to get past on the ridge. So his account was still a bit of a stretch. Over the years, he revised his statement multiple times, eventually suggesting they might have been at the 1st step, maybe even on their way back down. Just before he passed away in 1987, he admitted that he'd never been sure of the exact spot where he saw those moving figures. But how did this uncertainty impact the climbers' fate? The worsening weather was a more immediate concern, with George and Sandy already 5 hours behind schedule. After waiting anxiously, Noel decided to head up to Camp 6 himself, only to find it destroyed by the relentless snowstorm. He searched as best he could in those severe conditions, but he couldn't find any trace of the climbers. By evening, he had no choice but to head back to Camp 4. The next day, he returned with 2 porters to keep looking, but it was hopeless. The snow seemed to have swallowed both men. After hours of searching with no luck, it was clear that the storm had wiped out any chance of their survival. With no other options, Noel had to call off the search, marking the end of yet another failed Everest expedition, but this time, leaving behind a trail of questions that still remain unanswered, even after a century. What happened to them up there? Did they fall, freeze to death, get caught in a storm? Where exactly did they end up? And most important of them all, did they actually reach the summit and die on the way down? Or did Everest stop them before they could make history? The only way to find out was to locate their bodies. They had carried a camera with them, hoping to snap a photo if they reached the top. So if they were ever found, That camera might finally tell their story. Over the years, search parties came and went, scaling the mountain, hoping to uncover even the smallest trace of them. But it wasn't until 9 years later that the first clue finally surfaced. During the 1933 British expedition, a team came across an abandoned ice axe just below the ridge near the first step. The Swiss manufacturer's name on the axe matched the ones given to the 1924 expedition team. Since only George and Sandy had reached that height in 1924, it was likely one of theirs. George's wife couldn't identify it, so they assumed it belonged to Sandy. The expedition leader thought it looked like the scene of an accident. He believed this could be where one or both of the climbers slipped and fell, thinking it was probably the highest point they'd reached before things went wrong. However, Noel wasn't buying that theory. He thought they might have left the axe behind on purpose to pick it up on the way back, since the next part of the climb was mostly rock and didn't require an ice axe. The next big sighting came 3 years later, during another British Mount Everest expedition. English mountaineer Frank Smythe was scanning Everest's north face with a powerful telescope from base camp. That's when he spotted something that he thought was the body of either George or Sandy. But he kept it to himself for a year, worried the press would blow it all out of proportion. Fast forward to May 29, 1953, when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay Sherpa made history as the first people to actually stand on top of Everest. By then, George and Sandy's attempt was widely believed to have failed, but the search for their bodies kept going. For the next 2 decades, things were quiet. Then in 1975, Chinese mountaineer Wang Hongbao had a breakthrough. At 26,575 feet, he spotted a body and immediately recognized it as an English mountaineer, just from the clothes. He gave a detailed location, saying it was about a 20-minute walk from Camp 6. This was the closest anyone had gotten to finding them, but somehow it took almost 11 more years before the first Mallory and Irvine research expedition was launched in 1986, based on this lead. Bad weather shut down that attempt too before the team could even make any real progress. Then nearly 4 years later, in May of 1991, an American mountain guide named Eric Simonson was out on Everest when he stumbled across a 1924 stamped oxygen cylinder. This was about 66 feet higher than where Sandy's ice axe was found in 1933. You know when you give up a goal but then something happens that tells you to hang in there? This discovery reignited the search in Eric's mind. With 2 key pieces of gear showing up pretty close to each other, Eric started thinking the same thing the 1933 expedition had suggested. This had to be the spot where George and Sandy's climb took a tragic turn. And given the mountain's steep slope, it looked like they could have slipped and fallen a crazy distance, maybe even in the same area where that Chinese climber said he saw a body back in 1975. Eric returned to Everest in 1999, leading the second Mallory and Irvine research expedition to investigate further. And that's when the most significant find in this case came to light. On May 1, 1999, 4 expedition climbers discovered a body in a dip in the slope at 26,700 feet that was around 1,000 feet below and 330 feet to the side of where the ice axe had been found. Since they thought the axe belonged to Sandy, they figured this body had to be his too. The climbers found the body's waist still looped with rope, showing severe hemorrhaging from what looked like a harsh rope jerk injury. However, compared to other victims who'd fallen all the way from the northeast ridge, this guy's injuries weren't that bad, which made them think he survived the first fall, but got hit with some bad luck afterward. A golf ball-sized puncture in his forehead appeared to be the cause of death. The team began piecing together the story. They believed the climber, thought to be Sandy, had slipped and fallen near the spot where his ice axe was found back in 1933. Unable to stop himself, he likely had to slide further down the steep terrain. To slow his descent, he probably dragged his ice axe behind him, a technique climbers call a glissade. However, a rock may have deflected the axe, causing it to fatally strike him in the head. So for a while, everything lined up for Sandy, until one of the team members spotted the collar of his torn jacket. It had George Mallory stitched on it, not Sandy Irvine. That's when they realized they'd actually found George's body instead. This unexpected twist gave us three possible theories. Theory 1. The body was Sandy's, but he wore George's jacket, explaining the ice axe mix-up. Theory 2. The ice axe found in 1933 wasn't Sandy's, but George's, and the body was George's too. Theory 3. George and Sandy were roped together when they fell. George ended up where they found him, but Sandy fell elsewhere. DNA testing confirmed the body was definitely George Mallory, which ruled out the first one. Plus, George's wife had already denied recognizing the ice axe, so that shot down the second possibility as well. So, what they were left with was the third one. Maybe the two were roped together when the whole thing went south. While it made a lot of sense how the situation could have gone down, the big question still remained. Did the duo actually make it to the summit, or not? The research team found two pieces of evidence that suggested they might have made it. First, George had been carrying a photo of his wife, planning to leave it at the summit when he got there. But no photo was found on his body, which meant that he might have actually reached the summit and left it there. The second clue came from his snow goggles, which were found in his pocket. This suggested he had died at night, and that he and Sandy were probably making their summit push late in the day and had been coming back down when things went wrong. Both of these could have been backed up if the team had found his pocket camera, but George didn't have one, so it was likely Sandy who had both cameras. And once again, everything came down to finding Sandy's body, and hopefully the cameras with it, to figure out exactly what happened to these two guys. Over the years, there have been a bunch of half-hearted claims about people spotting Sandy's body, but none of them were solid enough to launch a full-blown search. However, as the 21st century rolled in, things started to take some unexpected turns. One of the major developments was the impact of global warming and climate change on Mount Everest. Data shows that in the past 30 years, the average temperature on Everest has increased by about 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. While this might seem small, it's causing long-term issues like melting glaciers and shifting mountain structures. However, it's also been a surprising help in solving this 100-year-old mystery. As the weather changes and glaciers shift, more and more bodies that were buried under layers of snow are starting to surface. Mountaineers, high-altitude porters, and rescue teams are noticing these remains popping up faster than usual, and it's only expected to increase in the future. Which brings us full circle to the present. The latest and most shocking discovery came in late September 2024, when National Geographic photographer and director Jimmy Chin was leading his crew down the central Rongbuk Glacier. They stumbled upon an oxygen bottle marked with the date 1933. The oxygen bottle turned out to be from the same British Everest expedition that had discovered Sandy's ice axe. Jimmy had a gut feeling that, with the mountain melting and revealing old layers, there might be more things from that time buried nearby. He wondered if Sandy's body could finally be among those remains, now coming to light after all these years. Though it seemed like a long shot, Jimmy's guess was surprisingly right. Jimmy figured that if the oxygen tank had been exposed because of a glacier shift, it probably ended up much farther down than a body would have since the tank was lighter. He started thinking that Sandy's remains might be somewhere a few hundred yards up the glacier. So, over the next few days, Jimmy and his team took a winding route, carefully navigating the glacier's folds and crevasses. Finally, one of his crew members spotted a boot poking out from the ice, which they figured had probably just melted out in the last week. Inside the boot was a broken-off human foot still in a sock, with a name tape that read A.C. Irvine. Jimmy carefully carried the boot and foot off the mountain in a cooler and handed it over to the authorities for DNA testing. I can't imagine the atmosphere on that team, knowing they'd found such an incredible piece of history. No wonder they were running around dropping F-bombs. This discovery obviously adds a crucial update in figuring out what really happened to George and Sandy. While Jimmy hasn't shared the exact spot where they found it, it was about 7,000 feet below where George's body was located. That pretty much suggests that both climbers might have fallen in that same area, but then avalanches and snowstorms likely swept Sandy's body away, burying it under snow and breaking it apart before it ended up where it was found. It's also a huge step forward in the search for more clues. Jimmy is hopeful they might uncover more pieces of evidence, or maybe even the cameras from the area nearby. Experts from Kodak think there's a solid chance that the black and white film in those cameras could still be developed into usable images because of the way the film's chemicals react to freezing temperatures. This means we're closer than ever to solving the biggest mystery in the history of Mount Everest. Jimmy and his team are still on the hunt for those cameras. They could hold photos proving whether George and Sandy reached the summit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.
A 45-year-old climber from West Bengal, India, has died near the summit of Mount Everest. During the descent, he began to show signs of extreme exhaustion and an altitude sickness. Ghosh eventually refused to continue the descent.
It was May 14th, 2025, and two men were preparing for what should have been the greatest achievement of their lives. One was getting ready to crawl into a tent at Camp 4. The other was starting his climb through the darkness toward Everest's summit. Within 24 hours, one of these men would become a medical mystery, and the other would make a decision so shocking that even tough mountaineers couldn't believe it. Today, I'm covering the Everest deaths of 2025 that shouldn't have happened. Deaths so psychologically disturbing that they challenge everything we think we know about human survival instinct. Welcome to the Extreme Edge. Around 8 p.m. on May 14th, 2025, campers at Everest Camp 4 watched as multiple headlamps swung into view as they walked right into their enclosure, crunching closer to the orange tents. Now, this was no big deal. At 26,000 feet, this cluster of orange tents is the last stop before the summit. It's also deep inside what climbers call the death zone. One of those lights belonged to Philip Santiago, a 45-year-old climber from the Philippines. Now, you should know, Philip wasn't just another wealthy adventurer.
I am your regular blue-collar worker, and I identify with the average man's daily struggle to put food on the table. We are the underdogs.
He'd said in a Facebook post before the expedition, "We are the underdogs." As an engineer, he'd saved for years for this moment. But this wasn't just about personal glory. Santiago had made what he called a covenant with God to put deeper meaning to this practice of passion. He was climbing for children with cancer and communities without clean water. Climbing Mount Everest is very little compared to the battles these little warriors are facing every day, he'd said. He'd probably trained for months or even years for this moment. Most Everest climbers do. And now he was just 8 or 9 hours from the top of the world. He should have been happy. He should have been thrilled. His journey to the top of the world was almost complete. But something was wrong. Philip's teammates noticed his shoulders sagging. His words came in ragged, one-word bursts, and he was visibly exhausted. Instead of the excitement you'd expect from someone about to attempt the summit, Santiago looked defeated. He unclipped from the fixed line, crawled into the nearest orange tent, and told his colleagues what would be his last words. "I'll rest now," or something like that. Now, these simple, normal words are something that every exhausted climber has said, but his words would take on a haunting meaning by morning. See, here's what you need to understand about Camp 4 on Everest. Some climbers joke that it's the only campsite on Earth where you wake up sicker than when you went to bed. But it's not really a joke. It looks safe. I mean, look at it. Just a flat area covered in tents. But it's a trap. A parking lot in one of the most dangerous regions of Earth where climbers convince themselves they're resting when really they're racing against time. At 26,000 feet, your body is dying. Even lying completely still, your brain is starving for oxygen. Your lungs are slowly filling with fluid, molecule by molecule. Your heart is working triple time just to keep you alive. Most teams leave Camp 4 around midnight so they can reach the summit in the late morning and get back down before the afternoon winds build. That was Philip's plan too. As the team settled, Philip's tent mate was sorting gear for the midnight summit push. He glanced over at him, zipped up to his chin, eyes closed, breathing hard but steady. Nothing looked alarming. This was normal exhaustion, he probably thought. The hours ticked by. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. When midnight arrived and alarms started chirping across Camp 4, Santiago's tent mate reached over to shake him awake. But there was one slight problem. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you want more raw, uncut stories we can't show here, come join the Extreme community on Patreon. See you on the real Extreme Edge. He got no response. Worried, he shook him harder, probably thinking Santiago was just deeply asleep. Still, nothing. That's when he noticed. Philip had no pulse. His skin was already cooling. He quickly raised an alarm, but it was too late. In the time it had taken other climbers to melt snow for their summit push, Philip had died quietly, without a sound, without a struggle. The official cause of death, which came from the Department of Tourism on May 15th, was unknown suspected exhaustion or altitude illness. But doctors who understand high-altitude medicine know there are two silent killers at 26,000 feet. The first is high-altitude pulmonary edema. Your lungs fill with fluid, and you essentially drown in your own body. The second is sudden cardiac arrest from overexertion. Either one can kill a healthy person in under an hour. Santiago had done some heavy climbing that afternoon, on Everest routes that push even the strongest climbers to their limits. He'd reached Camp 4 visibly exhausted. He likely lay down with microscopic fluid already building in his lungs. When he closed his eyes to rest, the drowning finished itself. Had he turned back the moment that deep fatigue set in, he probably almost certainly would have survived. I think what makes this death so unsettling to me is that a quick pulse ox check and an immediate descent, which is standard on many 26,000-foot peaks, would almost certainly have saved him. But on Everest, there's no park rule that forces teams to stop, and no ranger checks vitals at Camp 4. In the death zone, the act of lying down is a coin flip, and Philip drew the wrong side of that coin. But as painful as Philip's death was, what happened in our next story defies everything we understand about human survival instinct. To understand why this death is so unbelievable, you need to know a couple of things. First, the Hillary step. Picture a 40-foot wall of rock and ice. Now put it at 28,700 feet, so high that commercial airplanes fly below you. The oxygen is so thin that your body is literally dying with every breath. One wrong move, and you fall 10,000 feet down the mountain. The Hillary Step is the last major obstacle before the summit of Everest. It's not a place where you rest, and it's not a place where you make decisions. It's a place where you move fast or you die. No guarantees, though. What happened at the Hillary Step on May 15th, 2025 goes against every survival instinct humans possess. Let's start 19 hours earlier, when everything seemed normal. This is the story of Subrata Ghosh. Subrata Ghosh had been dreaming of Everest for years. The 45-year-old from Ranagat, Bengal had done everything right. He'd trained his body, he'd saved his money, he'd hired a reputable company, Snowy Horizon Treks, and been assigned an experienced Sherpa guide named Palshan Tamang. On the night of May 14th, the two men prepared for their summit push. This is the moment every Everest climber lives for, the final ascent to the top of the world. But Ghosh made a decision that would cascade into tragedy. He wanted to start at 10 p.m. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but on Everest, timing is everything. Most climbers start their summit push between midnight and 2 a.m. Why? Because you need to reach the summit by late morning and get back down before the afternoon weather turns deadly. Starting at 10 p.m. meant they were already stretching their luck a bit on the schedule. The timing put them near the front of the summit queue, with no teams already higher on the route. There'd be no early radio call warning of fresh wind or cloud. In other words, they were climbing blind. But Ghosh did not care. He was excited. Maybe too excited. Right from the very beginning, something was off. Ghosh was moving slowly, really slowly. In the beam of his headlamp, Sherpa Tamang, his guide, could see his client struggling with every step. I want you to imagine being Sherpa Tamang in this moment. You're responsible for this man's life. You can see he's moving too slowly, but you also know he's paid tens of thousands of dollars for this chance. He's trained for years. Do you turn him around? Do you crush his dreams? Tamang made a decision he would later regret. He kept going. Hour after hour, they climbed through the darkness. The temperature was negative 40 degrees. The wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. Every step required 3 or 4 gasping breaths. And Gosh kept falling further behind schedule. On any guided climb, a pace this slow is a textbook signal to abort. If Nepal enforced strict turnaround rules like some countries do, Tamang could have pointed to the law, not just his judgment, and simply said, "We stop here." But they don't. And here's the thing about summit fever. It makes you ignore warning signs. Gosh had probably been visualizing this moment for years, standing on top of the world, achieving the impossible. That vision can be more powerful than pain, more powerful than exhaustion, and more powerful than logic. Tamang later said Gosh was overexcited and wouldn't listen to warnings. He kept pushing upwards, driven by a dream that was about to become a nightmare. As the sun rose on May 15th, they were still climbing, still pushing toward the summit, already dangerously behind schedule. Then, around 11 a.m., the weather changed. Another climber on the mountain that day, Suman Sarkar from Bardhaman, reported conditions so violent that he could only stand on the summit for 15 minutes. The wind speed was increasing every hour, turning the upper mountain into a frozen hell. But Gosh had come too far to turn back. Sometime in the afternoon, nobody knows exactly when, he finally made it. He stood on the summit of Everest, 29,032 feet, the highest point on Earth. For a brief moment, his dream had come true. What happened next is where this story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. The descent started normally. If anything about stumbling down from 29,000 feet in hurricane-force winds can be called normal. Gosh was exhausted. He'd been in the death zone for over 16 hours. His oxygen was running low. His body was shutting down, but he was moving. He was descending, and he was going to make it. Then they reached the Hillary Step. Remember that 40-foot wall I described? It's even more dangerous on the way down. You're exhausted, you're oxygen deprived, you have to navigate it backwards. One slip means certain death. And right there, at the worst possible place on the entire mountain, Subrata Ghosh stopped moving. He turned to his Sherpa and spoke 4 words that should never be spoken in the death zone. "I can't see anything." That was pretty scary, but it was what he said next that made this one of the most disturbing deaths in Everest history. Because Ghosh didn't just say he couldn't see, he made a declaration that went against every human survival instinct. He said, "I won't move." I need you to understand how insane this is. When you're in danger, your body floods with adrenaline, your muscles prepare to fight or flee. Every cell in your body screams at you to move, to survive, to get to safety. But there's a third stress response we often overlook: freeze. It's what happens when your brain decides the threat is so overwhelming that neither fighting nor fleeing will work. Your body simply shuts down. Still, even knowing this, what Ghosh did next defies explanation. Because at 28,700 feet, in screaming winds and blowing snow, he didn't just freeze. He decided not to move. Now, Palshen Tamang immediately recognized what was happening. The sudden blindness, irrational behavior, and complete shutdown of normal decision-making all pointed to one thing. These were classic signs of severe altitude sickness. When your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, it stops working properly. You might hallucinate. You might lose your vision. You might make decisions that make no sense. But here's what makes Ghosh's case so disturbing. He didn't collapse. He didn't pass out. He simply made a conscious decision to stop trying. He literally sat down in a place called the death zone and gave up. What followed was 8 hours of hell that defies comprehension. First, Tamang tried reasoning with him. Just imagine it if you can. Two men screaming at each other over howling winds, one begging the other to save his own life. You have to move. I won't. You'll die. I won't move. For hours, Tamang pleaded. He probably brought up everything he could think of. Ghosh's family back in Bengal, his achievement of reaching the summit, the fact that safety was just a few hours away. But Ghosh wouldn't move. So Tamang did something that shows the incredible dedication of Sherpa guides. He decided to physically drag his client down the mountain. For 4 excruciating hours in the dark, in the death zone, Tamang pulled, pushed, and carried Ghosh down the Hillary step. Every movement was agony. Every foot of progress took superhuman effort. And after 4 hours of this torture, they had moved just 300 feet. That's about the length of a football field, and it had taken that long. I try to imagine the physical toll this took on Tamang. At sea level, carrying another person 300 feet would be exhausting. At 28,000 feet, where there's only 1/3 the oxygen your body needs, it's almost impossible. So it's no surprise that after those 4 hours, Tamang collapsed next to Ghosh. Both men sat there in the snow above the clouds in the death zone, and Tamang faced a realization that would haunt him forever. His oxygen was running out. The brutal math of Everest is that you carry a limited supply of oxygen. Use too much and you die. Run out and you die. Share it with someone else and you both die. Tamang had been in the death zone for almost 16 hours. He'd spent 8 of those hours trying to save a man who wouldn't save himself. His own body was failing. Frostbite was setting in. His brain was starting to malfunction from a lack of oxygen. And still, he stayed with Ghosh for as long as he could. But as their oxygen supplies dwindled to nothing, Tamang faced the kind of decision that no training prepares you for. In survival situations, people have done incredible things. They've cut off their own arms to escape. They've drunk their own waste to survive. They've eaten things I can't even mention here. But leaving someone behind, someone you're responsible for, someone who's still alive, still breathing, still sitting there in the snow, that's a different kind of survival decision. In the end, Tamang chose life. He left Subrata Ghosh sitting in the snow near the Hillary step and began his own desperate descent, alone, in the dark, without supplemental oxygen. What happened next shows just how close Tamang came to joining Ghosh on the mountain. As he descended, Tamang's oxygen-starved brain began to malfunction. He started hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices in the wind. At one point, he couldn't remember where he was or what he was doing. Imagine trying to navigate one of the most dangerous descents in the world while your brain is playing tricks on you. Every step could send you tumbling thousands of feet. Every decision could be your last. And all the while, you're morally carrying the weight of the man you left behind, the promise you couldn't keep, the life you couldn't save. Somehow, through sheer will or mountain luck, Tamang made it. He stumbled into Camp 4 at sunrise after being in the death zone for nearly 20 hours. His fellow climbers found him with severe frostbite, babbling incoherently, more dead than alive. It took him 2 full days to recover enough to explain what had happened up there in the darkness near the Hillary step. When search teams finally reached the Hillary step, they found Subrata Ghosh exactly where Tamang had left him. He was still sitting in the same position, still wearing all his gear, frozen solid in the position where he'd decided to give up. The 3 words that had sealed his fate, "I won't move," had become his epitaph. What makes this death so disturbing isn't just that Ghosh died on Everest. People die on Everest every year. It's that he chose to die. He sat down in the most dangerous place on Earth and refused to try to save himself. Sure, Ghosh had been in the death zone for over 16 hours when he sat down. His body was shutting down. His brain was malfunctioning from lack of oxygen. But other climbers have survived longer in the death zone. Other climbers have pushed through similar exhaustion. What made Gosh different? Why did he give up when others keep fighting? Now, I've read dozens of accounts of altitude sickness, and while it affects decision-making, it doesn't typically make people give up entirely. Most climbers, even when severely impaired, still have some survival instinct driving them to descend. Subrata seemed to have made a conscious choice to die on that mountain rather than give up his summit achievement. It's like once he reached the top, some part of him decided that was enough, that he'd rather die having accomplished his dream than live knowing he had to abandon it. As you can imagine, Temang's decision raised some eyebrows. One side argues that a guide should never abandon their client regardless of the circumstances. The other side says he did the only rational thing, that staying would have meant 2 deaths instead of 1. But I think there's a third possibility that no one's talking about. What if Subrata wanted to be left alone? What if he had already decided his fate, and Temang's attempts to save him were actually prolonging his suffering? I don't know. It's a dark thought, but it might explain why an otherwise rational person would sit down in the death zone and refuse to move, even when faced with certain death. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. When you calmly look at it though, Gosh's death wasn't just one bad decision. It was a cascade of preventable choices. Any experienced climber watching would have been screaming, "Turn around," at multiple points. But without enforced rules, and with summit fever clouding judgment, the tragedy rolled on. Personally, I think the courage Palchen Temang showed, first in trying to save Gosh for 8 hours, then in making the hardest decision of his life, was remarkable. While it makes the tragedy even more heartbreaking, it reminds me that even in the worst situations, people can show incredible strength. Temang could have left immediately when Gosh sat down. He could have saved himself hours of agony and risk, but he stayed. He tried. He gave everything he had until he had nothing left to give. What would you do if someone you were responsible for just gave up? If they sat down in a deadly place and refused to move? How long would you try to save them? How much would you risk? That's the real story here. Not just that a man gave up in the death zone, but that another man refused to give up on him until he absolutely had to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave. It was May 29th, 1953, when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay made history on the first summit of Mount Everest. But what if I told you that 50 years ago, when the first woman reached the top, she was told to stay at home with her kids, where she belonged. She got buried alive on Everest, and she still kept climbing. Do you know her name? This is the wild, nearly forgotten story of Junko Tabei. Welcome to the Extreme Edge. On May 4th, 1975, 22 years after the first successful summit, 5 Japanese women were sleeping in their tents at Camp 2 on Mount Everest, 20,000 feet above sea level. To put that in comparison, that is so high that the air has only half the oxygen your body needs. The temperature outside was below freezing. Their tents were the only thing between them and death. These women had been on the mountain for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of thin air, freezing temperatures, and bodies slowly breaking down. They'd just established Camp 5 at almost 26,000 feet and descended to rest before their final push to the summit. They were exhausted, they were weak, and they were about to face something that would push them beyond human limits. At 2 a.m. in the pitch black of night, they heard it. A rumbling from somewhere above them on the mountain. It was an avalanche of snow tumbling down from high up Everest's peaks, and it was headed their way. In the seconds it took for their exhausted brains to process what that sound meant, it was already too late. Tons of ice and snow came crashing down the mountain at over 100 miles per hour. When it hit Camp 2, the tents didn't just collapse, they were instantly crushed flat. And inside one of those tents, one of those women was Junko Tabei. She went from deep sleep to being buried alive in less than a second. The snow packed around her like concrete. She couldn't move her arms. She couldn't move her legs. She couldn't even move her fingers. The weight was crushing her chest. Each breath was a fight, and each breath brought less air than the last. The fact that she could even find room to breathe is mind-boggling. In the darkness, trapped under tons of snow, Tabei's mind raced. She couldn't call for help. The snow muffled everything. She couldn't dig herself out. Her arms were pinned. All she could do was lie there, taking smaller and smaller breaths, wondering if this was how her story would end. The elite Sherpa climbers assisting their expedition heard the avalanche, and when they got to the scene and saw the devastation wrought by the avalanche, they immediately went to work. They dug frantically through the snow, searching for any sign of the buried tents. Minutes passed. The women under the snow were running out of air. When they finally found Tabei's tent, it took 4 Sherpas to pull her out. 4 strong men, digging and pulling with everything they had to extract one small woman from the snow's grip. When they finally freed her, Tabei was barely conscious. Her entire body was covered in severe bruising. The avalanche had beaten her like a prize fighter. Every inch of her body screamed in pain. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you want more raw, uncut stories we can't show here, join the Extreme community on Patreon. See you on the real Extreme Edge. Now, most people would have seen this as the universe telling them to go home, and nobody would have blamed her if she thought so. I mean, the mountain had literally tried to bury her alive. She had severe bruising all over her body. She could barely move without pain shooting through her ribs and back. But when her team suggested she return to base camp to recover, Junko said something that still gives me the chills. There was no way I was leaving the mountain. Think about the mental strength that took. She had just survived what should have been a death sentence. Her body was broken, but her spirit was unbreakable. Because here's what most on the mountain didn't know. This wasn't just about climbing a mountain. This was about proving that a 35-year-old Japanese mother could do something no woman in history had ever done. But to understand why she made that choice, why she refused to quit when she had every reason to, we need to go back to when this whole impossible dream began. So, picture this. It's 1975 in Japan, and there's this woman named Junko Tabei who's about to do something that's going to make a lot of people very, very angry. She's packing her climbing gear while her infant daughter plays in the next room. And when I say people were angry, I mean the kind of angry where complete strangers feel comfortable telling you exactly what they think of your life choices. You see, in the 1970s in Japan, there was this unspoken rule. Mothers stayed home, period. They didn't leave their children to go climb mountains. They didn't have dreams that required them to be gone for months at a time. And they definitely didn't organize expeditions for women to the highest mountain on Earth. But here was Tabei, planning something that would make everyone's heads explode. She wanted to lead the first all-women Japanese expedition to Mount Everest. And the thing is, it wasn't just a whim. Tabei had been in love with the mountain since she was 10 years old. Her first climb was on a school trip to Mount Nasu, and something clicked. Up there, above the world, she found something she couldn't find anywhere else. Freedom, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning that had nothing to do with what anyone else expected from her. Before most climbers outside Japan had even heard her name, Tabei had already bagged every 9,000-foot peak in the Japanese Alps, winter ascents included. In 1965, she and 2 partners clawed up the icy death zone couloir of Tanigawadake's Ichi no Kurosawa face, a wall so lethal, Japanese climbers call it the mountain that eats men. Then she went overseas and started rewriting record books. In 1970, she led the first all-woman Himalayan expedition and stood on Annapurna 3. That single climb made her the first woman and the first Japanese climber, period, to reach that peak. She followed it with winter routes on Mont Blanc, a clean dash up the Matterhorn, and trips to Manaslu and Lhotse that taught her exactly what the Himalayan ranges could throw at a body. So when critics muttered that a mother of one had no business on Everest, Her resume pretty much said, "I've already danced with mountains that kill the unprepared, and I'm still here." But here's the thing. The Japanese mountaineering community literally did not care about any of that. The Japanese Alpine Club was basically a boys' club with an invisible "No Girls Allowed" sign on the door. They had their journals where only men's adventures were published. They had their meetings where only men made decisions. They had their traditions that had been the same for decades. They controlled the permits, the funding, and the entire mountaineering infrastructure in Japan. And they made their position clear. It would be impossible for a women-only expedition to succeed on Everest. They said women weren't strong enough. They would panic in a crisis. Women couldn't handle the altitude. A potential sponsor told her when she asked for funding, "Rather than do something like this, raise your children and keep your family tight." Think about that for a second. You're someone who's already proven yourself as a world-class climber, having led expeditions to some of the most challenging peaks in Asia. You've got experience, a solid plan, and an expert team. And people are telling you to go home and do housework instead. But what makes this battle even more brutal is that Junko isn't just fighting against strangers, she's fighting against her own guilt. She's got an infant daughter at home. Every day she spends on Everest is a day away from her child. Every hour planning the expedition is an hour she's not being the traditional Japanese mother society expects her to be. The internal struggle tore her apart. She later wrote about lying awake at night, tears streaming down her face, torn between her love for her daughter and her dream of making history and a grand purpose. She wrote, "Although I would never forfeit Everest, I felt pulled in the two directions of mountains and motherhood." Can you imagine that pressure? You're already attempting something no woman has ever done. You're facing opposition from every direction, and on top of that, you're questioning whether you're abandoning your responsibilities as a mother. Despite this, instead of letting other people's limitations become her limitations, Junko decided to prove everyone wrong through action. Junko did what any reasonable person would do when faced with a locked door. She built her own door. She created the Joshi Tohan Club, Japan's first women-only climbing team, and filled it with teachers, clerks, chemists, and even a concert violinist. Two of the members, including Junko herself, were mothers. None were professional athletes, but all shared the stubborn certainty that a rope team did not need a single man to stand in the death zone. Securing an Everest permit proved slower than any ascent. The group applied in 1971 and waited 4 grinding years before Nepal finally granted a spring 1975 slot. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost hope once or twice in those 4 years, and I get it now. When they got the permit, they had to go. It was now or never. Money was the next wall. Each climber had to raise about 1.5 million yen, roughly $5,000 at the time. Tabe taught piano at night, proofread scientific papers by day, and even sold house-made jam on weekends just to raise funding. Corporate sponsors dismissed them with the usual "raise your children first" advice. Until the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper and Nippon Television offered them last-minute backing. It was clear that they were on their own. And the gear situation was even worse. Remember, this was 1975. Women's mountaineering equipment didn't exist. The climbing industry had never considered that women might want to climb anything higher than a stepladder. So these 15 Japanese women learned to sew. They spent months sitting around tables and sewing machines, making their gear for the world's tallest mountain. Their own expedition suits, sleeping bags, their own everything. And above money, gear, and daily life responsibilities, training was just as relentless. Pre-dawn hill sprints with 44-pound packs, winter bivouacs on Fuji's windswept summit, and endless rope drills on Tanigawadake's lethal rock faces. By 1975, the Japanese women's Everest expedition shipped 8 tons of food, tents, and home-sewn clothing to Kathmandu. They left Japan in mid-February 1975, and after landing in Kathmandu, it took 2 full weeks of hiking through valleys and climbing icy mountain trails to reach Everest Base Camp. They finally got there on March 16, 1975, setting their tents at 17,500 feet on the Khumbu Glacier. Now, the route they'd chosen was the same path taken by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay back in 1953, the Southeast Ridge. It was famous, but it was also incredibly dangerous. First, they'd have to climb through something called the Khumbu Icefall, which is basically a shifting maze of ice towers the size of buildings that can collapse without warning and crush you instantly. Then cross the Western Khum, an open valley where avalanches pour down from both sides. After that, they'd have to claw their way up the Lhotse face, a wall of blue ice so steep that one mistake means a 4,000-foot fall to your death. And finally, if they survived all that, they'd establish their final camp on the South Col, the last flat spot before the final push to Everest's summit, where the wind can hit 200 miles per hour and the cold can kill you in minutes. But as they were getting ready to start this death-defying climb, they heard some news that changed everything. On the other side of Everest, the Tibetan side, there was another expedition. And when I say expedition, I need you to understand the scale we're talking about here. The Chinese government had assembled around 200 people. Climbers, support staff, government officials, scientists, had enough equipment to supply a small army. This wasn't just a climbing team. This was a full-scale national mission with one goal: to put their own female climber, a Tibetan woman named Pan Duo, on the summit first. Now, Pan Duo's story is its own kind of crazy. Back in 1960, she was part of a Chinese expedition that successfully summited Everest. She was right there, climbing strong, until they hit 6,400 meters, or around 20,997 feet. That's when she was ordered to stop. The reason? Well, believe it or not, their reason was that altitude was a man's world, as if the mountain checked gender IDs at 21,000 feet. But by 1975, the Chinese government had changed its tune for 3 reasons. First was national pride. Back in 1960, a Chinese team had claimed the first ascent of Everest from the north side, but many Western climbers openly doubted whether they'd actually reached the summit. There were no photos, no clear evidence. So China saw 1975 as their chance to silence the doubters once and for all. Second was, as you must have guessed, politics. 1975 was the UN's International Year of Women, and China wanted to showcase their belief that, as Chairman Mao famously said, women hold up half the sky. Putting a Tibetan woman on the summit would be perfect propaganda. But here's the third reason, and this is where it gets really intense. When China learned that Junko Tabei and her team of Japanese women were climbing from the south side, it sparked a competitive fire that turned this into something way bigger than just mountaineering. The Chinese government simply could not allow Japan to take the honor of placing the first woman on top of Everest. And then, something happened that shows you just how serious they were about winning this race. The Chinese team was making good progress up on their side of the mountain when tragedy struck. One of their climbers fell to his death. Now, in any normal situation, this would mean retreating, regrouping, maybe calling off the expedition entirely out of respect for their fallen teammate. But instead of backing down, Chinese officials sent this message to their expedition: climb ahead of the Japanese women. Think about that for a second. They had just lost a team member, and instead of mourning or retreating, the government's response was to push harder and faster to beat a team of 15 Japanese women to the summit. So now, Tabei wasn't just climbing against the mountain, she was climbing against time, against politics, against a government-backed expedition that had been ordered to beat her team at all costs. And that brings us back to May 4th, 1975. Camp 2, the avalanche. Tabei had been buried alive under tons of snow with cracked ribs and bruises covering her entire body, and had only just survived. You can now picture the pressure Junko was under. She's recovering from nearly dying in an avalanche, her body is broken and bruised, and she knows that on the other side of the mountain, 200 people are racing to beat her to the summit. Every day she spent recovering was a day her competition got closer to making history first. But here's where Junko's character really shines through. Even though she was hurt, even though the odds were against her, she refused to let her team rush their summit attempt just to beat the Chinese. She knew that being first meant nothing if they didn't make it back alive. So, on May 10th, just 6 days after being buried alive, Junko and her climbing partner, Sherpa Ang Chering, began their slow push upward again. Despite the severe bruising and lingering pain, Tabe refused to abandon the climb. The plan was clear. They'd carefully ascend again back through the Khumbu icefall, up past Camp 3, and then establish themselves at Camp 4 on the South Col at around 26,000 feet. It was incredibly slow going. Each breath hurt, and every step was agony. But Tabe knew rushing could be deadly, especially with her injuries. It took her team 5 full days of slow climbing and resting, finally arriving at Camp 4 on the afternoon of May 15th. That night, the pair rested briefly in their tents, drinking water melted from snow and breathing bottled oxygen. At midnight, May 16th, they left their tents and began their final climb toward Everest's summit. In pitch darkness, they climbed slowly up the southeast ridge. Just after sunrise, they arrived at the most notorious obstacle on Everest, the Hillary Step, a vertical wall of rock and ice nearly 40 feet high, at an altitude of almost 29,000 feet. At this height, each breath contains about a third of the oxygen found at sea level. Climbers call it the death zone, because the human body is literally, not metaphorically, dying at that altitude. With her body still battered from the avalanche, Junko carefully picked her way up the Hillary Step. Every move was exhausting. Every breath was desperate. And then, finally, at around 12:30 p.m. on May 16, 1975, Junko Tabe stepped onto the summit of Mount Everest. At that moment, she made history. Junko Tabe became the first woman and the 36th person overall to stand on the highest point on Earth. She'd conquered not just the mountain, but every obstacle society had thrown at her. She stood there for about 15 minutes, just long enough to take a few pictures, absorb the stunning view, and realize she'd accomplished something no woman before her had ever done. "I felt pure joy," she later wrote. "Here is the summit. I don't have to climb anymore." She was the first woman to stand on top of the world. A mother from Japan was told to stay home. A climber who was told women couldn't do it. A survivor who refused to let even an avalanche stop her. The photographs from the summit show a small figure in an orange suit, ice axe raised in triumph. You can't see her face clearly through the oxygen mask and goggles, but you don't need to. Her body language says everything. I made it. Women made it. But here's what Junko didn't know during her careful, methodical ascent. Her decision to prioritize safety over speed paid off in the most incredible way. While she was slowly and methodically picking her way up the mountain with broken ribs, something catastrophic was happening to the Chinese expedition on the other side. Remember, this was the team with 200 people and unlimited government backing. The team had been ordered to climb ahead of the Japanese women at all costs. Well, it turned out that at all costs was exactly what it was going to cost them. The climbing accident that killed their teammate had forced them to retreat and regroup, and they were losing precious time every single day. But when they finally launched their summit attempt, something happened that shows you why Junko's careful approach was so brilliant. Altitude sickness hit the Chinese team like a plague. 2 climbers made it up to 27,200 feet, just 1,800 feet from the summit, before their bodies completely shut down from altitude sickness. They had to be evacuated immediately or they would have died. But it didn't stop there. 7 men also collapsed and had to be carried down the mountain. So this mighty expedition that was supposed to dominate the mountain through sheer numbers and resources was suddenly down to just 1 woman, Pan Duo, and a handful of male climbers who were still standing. Meanwhile, Junko's patient, methodical approach meant that she reached the summit strong, healthy, and safe. Sometimes the tortoise really does beat the hare, even on Mount Everest. Despite this, Panduo and the Chinese team also reached the summit, but it happened 11 days later. She became the second woman to stand on top of Everest and the first to climb the more difficult northern route. Both women had made history. Both had proven the doubters wrong. Here's something that bothers me. Why don't we know these names? Why do we celebrate Edmund Hillary but not Junko Tabei? There are even schools named after him in New Zealand, but no schools are named after Junko. Why isn't her story known by every young girl who dreams of doing something impossible? Hillary wrote his autobiography, High Adventure, just 2 years after climbing Everest. 2 years. His story was in the bookstores around the world, from London to New York. But Junko? She spent decades writing 7 books about her adventures, but they remained locked in Japanese until 2017, 42 years after her historic climb, before anyone bothered to translate her story for the world to read. But here's another part that gets me. When Edmund Hillary summited in 1953, he was knighted by the Queen. His face ended up on money. He became an icon. Everyone knew his name. But Junko went quietly back to Japan, and that was pretty much that. Some Western climbing magazines mentioned her achievement in passing, and that was it. Some accounts even suggested that An Sering, her Sherpa guide, had essentially dragged her up the mountain, as if surviving an avalanche and climbing with a body full of bruises wasn't hard enough. They had to take away her achievement too. But Tabei didn't stop at Everest. She went on to become the first woman to climb the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. She used her fame to fight for the environmental protection of the mountains. She led cleanup expeditions. She researched climate change impacts on mountain communities. She also kept speaking out about women in mountaineering. In 1995, she organized the first Mount Everest conference for women, inviting all 32 women who had summited by then. She created spaces for women to share their stories, their challenges, and their triumphs. It was unusual enough to be a female climber in that era, she once wrote, let alone to make a stand in front of your friends that would possibly upset them. But she kept making stands, and she kept climbing. The wildest part is what she said about all of it. In her memoir, she wrote, "My approach was one of not worrying about the loss of a job or missing out on a promotion. I felt it was important to live a life we would never regret." Think about that. She nearly died in an avalanche. She climbed the world's highest mountain with a broken body. The world tried to erase her achievement, and her takeaway was simply, live a life you won't regret. Junko Tabei died in 2016. She was 77 years old and had been battling cancer for 4 years. But even while getting treatment, she kept climbing, because that's who she was. The mountain couldn't stop her. Society couldn't stop her. In the end, only cancer could do what Everest couldn't. The courage Junko Tabei showed, leaving her daughter to chase her dreams, facing ridicule from an entire society, surviving an avalanche, and still pushing for the summit, is beyond what most of us can imagine. While her story has been overlooked for too long, it reminds me that the most inspiring humans are often the ones history tries to forget. 50 years later, her name still isn't in most history books. But maybe that's changing. What do you think? Should stories like Tabei's be taught alongside Hillary's? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.
"2024 has changed climbing on Mount Everest forever. Here's what's happened on the world's tallest mountain. From drones to poop to global warming, the Everest experience has changed drastically. As always, viewer discretion is advised." Usually, when you want to summit Everest, it goes something like this. First, you arrive at base camp, where you spend several weeks acclimatizing to the altitude. You'll make a few preliminary climbs to camps at higher elevations, returning to base camp in between to rest and prepare your body for the thinning air. Then, when a suitable weather window opens, you make your push for the summit. This year, however, local authorities introduced new rules trying to solve some of the mountain's long-standing issues. You see, Mount Everest has an issue. It's becoming too crowded, and with crowds come problems, such as trash, waste, and safety hazards. In 2023, over 478 permits were issued to prospective climbers, all of who came along with their guides or Sherpas, putting the number of 1,200 people on the mountain, a record number that led to truly uncomfortable climbing. This crowd, in addition to things like record-breaking avalanches and mountains of waste and litter left on the mountain's storied slopes, put a major strain on the Everest experience. And so, the Nepali government, in an attempt to deal with growing concerns about safety, environmental problems, and local economic challenges, introduced a series of bold, new regulations to transform the Everest climbing experience for good. Gone are the days when base camp buzzed with the lively ambiance of cafes, bars, and other commercial businesses that provided comfort and luxury. The government, wanting to sharpen the focus on climbing, banned all business ventures at the camp. This move was, as one outlet put it, aimed to cut down on distractions and maintain the solemnity and seriousness of the Everest expeditions. Doing this wasn't just about reducing noise or clutter alone, though. It was a strategic decision to preserve the integrity of the climbing experience, ensuring that climbers and crews are focused solely on the mountain and their safety, rather than being tempted by the comforts of a pseudo-tourist hub that Everest is slowly turning to. Speaking of the commercialization of Mount Everest, even the entrance to base camp itself in 2024 turned into a huge controversy when the Nepali government made a huge billboard sign and stuck it in front of the massive rock that has welcomed climbers and always been the landmark symbol of reaching base camp. I trekked to Everest Base Camp in March of 2024, and I would agree that seeing a very commercialized sign sitting at the base of Mount Everest felt pretty weird. Many climbers felt this sign was an even bigger indicator that Mount Everest has lost its wild, untamed purity and become just another attraction for paying tourists. There's also always been tension in the Everest climbing community over the years about the difference in attitude to summiting Everest between Sherpas, the ethnic Nepalese tribesmen native to the Himalayas, who act as local guides, and the climbers themselves. As time and technology have moved forward, climbers have often displayed a more cavalier attitude to the dangers of the mountain, and many experienced mountain guides had just about had it. For example, Mingma Gyalji Sherpa, a leading figure in the Everest climbing community, noted that the combination of harsh weather and careless attitudes among climbers significantly contributed to the high number of deaths in 2023. Many climbers, particularly those from abroad, were overly eager to reach the summit, often setting out without proper supplies or adequate preparation. In response, the Nepali government introduced new regulations to both prevent and manage these conflicts more effectively. First, all climbers attempting to summit Mount Everest are now required to carry electronic tracking chips. These chips are supposed to be able to help search and rescue attempts. While this seems like a no-brainer, a closer look makes this a puzzling new rule. These required reflectors are often used in avalanche incidents for body recovery, but they require a bulky detector that is often carried via helicopter. And the impracticalities of this new required chip don't stop there. These tracking chips don't allow ground-based searches, and on Everest, most rescue and recovery missions are above 23,000 feet, where helicopters can't fly, meaning the detectors can't be carried or used. An expert weighed in on this and said his company has tested all manner of sensors, trackers, and even vital sign monitors on Everest, and says each one comes with its limitations, but none so much as Reco reflectors, which became the 2024 tracking chip of choice. Most climbers on Everest who get lost do so on the summit ridge, far beyond the possibility of a Reco-guided recovery. A better solution to the problem of climbers getting lost on the mountain would be that their guides do not leave them alone, the expert commented. Well, that makes sense to me. Don't leave your climbers alone on Mount Everest. These regulations also required that all expeditions must employ local porters and yaks for equipment transportation. So they forbade the use of helicopters to ferry gear to and from Everest Base Camp. Instead, All tents, climbing gear, and personnel would need to be transported solely by yaks. The rule's intention was to not only preserve nature and reduce helicopter traffic in the region, but to support the fading cultural practice and industry of yak herding. But while this supports the local economy and ensures that the benefits of the climbing industry remain within the local community, it's also a huge problem to deny helicopter transport of goods to base camp because there's just not enough yaks to meet demand. In other words, the yak supply chain is lacking. Speaking of yaks, here's my vote for 2024 Yak of the Year from my base camp trip. But in a bit of a head-scratcher, while the Nepalese government has wanted to emphasize the purity of the mountain, not relying on helicopters and focusing on local porters and yaks, they have also been experimenting with advanced technologies to enhance safety and efficiency. One significant breakthrough has been the 2024 introduction of drone technology for supply and waste management higher up on the mountain. The project involved using a new drone called a DJI Flycart 30, a machine capable of carrying substantial payloads even at extreme altitudes and environmental conditions. The drone successfully flew past the south slope of Mount Everest at 21,654 feet, carrying a 33-pound load of oxygen canisters. During the test run, 3 oxygen bottles and additional supplies were transported from Everest Base Camp to Camp 1, with trash being carried back down on the return flight, showcasing the drone's capability for both supply delivery, as well as addressing the long-standing issue of trash accumulation on the mountain. The introduction of drones could significantly reduce the risks Sherpa guides face, especially in hazardous areas like the Khumbu Icefall, a notorious section of the route where Sherpas traditionally make over 30 crossings in a season. Mingmagelje Sherpa, a mountain guide involved in the trials, shared his experience. Using drones has significantly reduced the time and risk associated with navigating through the treacherous Khumbu Icefall. Previously, we had to make multiple high-risk trips through this area, which has always been one of the most dangerous segments of the climb. Last year, I lost 3 Sherpas. If we're not lucky, if our time is not right, we lose our life there. Now, with the reliable assistance of drones, we can ensure that essential supplies reach high-altitude camps while minimizing the danger to human life. Now, while drones are cool and do mark a significant leap forward in mountaineering logistics, perhaps the most groundbreaking of the new rules introduced on Everest relates to waste management. This 2024 regulation, aimed at preserving the pristine environment of the world's highest peak, requires every climber and expedition to remove all their waste from the mountain, including human waste. Yes, we're talking about poop. Climbers ascending Mount Everest are now required to collect their poo in specially provided doggy bags, or wag bags, and carry at least 20 pounds of their waste back to base camp. Each person is given 3 bags to reuse throughout their climb, ensuring that they pack out everything they pack in. The decision comes in response to years of litter problems on Everest, with the mountain slopes increasingly covered in poop as adventure tourism booms. According to the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee's 2022 report, climbers generated over 35,273 pounds of poop in the spring of 2022 alone. That is, well, a lot of poop. And that's not to mention all the litter besides poop. Climbers on Everest are often too focused on survival to worry about tidying up. As they ascend, they shed weight by dumping everything from empty oxygen bottles to shredded tents. Over the years, these discarded items have accumulated, turning the slopes of Everest into an alpine junkyard. The trash problem on Everest is so severe that climbers have dubbed it the world's highest garbage dump. Among the debris, you can find an assortment of peculiar items that might make you chuckle. There are discarded prayer flags, abandoned climbing gear, and even the occasional stuffed animal. It's like a bizarre treasure hunt, but instead of gold, you're finding soggy boots and broken camp stoves. 2024's new regulations also brought a huge initiative. The Nepal Army, in collaboration with local authorities, is leading a significant cleanup campaign as part of the Clean Himalaya Campaign 2024. This year, They aim to remove 10 metric tons of garbage and retrieve up to 5 fallen climbers from Everest and nearby peaks like Mount Lhotse and Mount Nuptse. This extensive cleanup involves trained army personnel and experienced Sherpas working to clear waste from a base camp up to higher altitudes. Despite these efforts, Mount Everest remains littered with trash, with estimates suggesting that more than 140,000 tons of waste, including 3 tons of human excrement, are scattered across its slopes. But it's not just the environmental issues that have changed in 2024. There's also global warming problems. Mount Everest is melting, guys, and it's melting much, much faster than you can imagine. Researchers have been sounding the alarm for years, and now we're seeing the effects in real time. The ice that has shrouded Everest for millennia is retreating at an alarming rate, revealing rocks and exposing routes that were once safely encased in snow and ice. For example, a 2019 study showed that ice, which took around 2,000 years to form on Mount Everest's higher glacier, the South Col Glacier, has melted in around 25 years, meaning it has thinned out approximately 80 times faster than it formed. And this startling rate of loss has been directly correlated to the accelerated impact of climate change on high-altitude environments like Mount Everest. As the glacier melts, these movements become more unpredictable. The warmer temperatures cause the ice to weaken and break more frequently, which increases the risk of ice collapses. And nowhere is this more dangerous than in the treacherous grasp of the Khumbu Icefall, one of Everest's deadliest stretches. Even for the most prepared climbers, the icefall represents a formidable challenge, and it was a hurdle that only got worse in 2024. The Khumbu Icefall is located just above Everest Base Camp and serves as the first major obstacle for climbers on the South Col route to the summit. It is quite infamously known as one of the most dangerous parts of the Everest climb. This stretch of the mountain is called an icefall because it functions like a river of ice, constantly moving and shifting. This movement is driven by the slow descent of the Khumbu Glacier as it moves down the mountain, creating a dynamic and unstable ice structure. It's a treacherous maze of crevasses that can stretch over 300 feet deep and house-sized ice structures that can break free unexpectedly. Crossing the Khumbu Icefall involves crossing ladders laid over cracks and crevasses that can be up to hundreds of feet deep. The Khumbu Icefall patch is considered so dangerous that only a specialized team of Sherpas, known as the Icefall Doctors, dares to navigate and maintain it. This highly skilled group is tasked with the formidable job of carving out a viable route through the icefall each climbing season. Their work is critical, as they lay down ladders and ropes over deep crevasses and alongside unstable ice towers that could collapse at any moment. In 2024, the challenges in the icefall were compounded by a combination of factors directly linked to climate change. The primary issue was the accelerated melting of the glacier. As global temperatures rise, glaciers like Khumbu melt faster, leading to an increase in the number and size of crevasses and the instability of massive ice towers known as seracs. These seracs can stand as tall as houses and are prone to collapse without warning, triggering deadly avalanches, like the one that killed 3 Sherpas last year. The season's start was notably delayed because the Icefall Doctors faced significant difficulties creating a safe path for climbers. In fact, climbing it almost never took off. First, there was insufficient winter snowfall, which typically helps stabilize the glacier by compacting and hardening the snow and ice. This lack of snowfall left the ice looser and more fragmented than usual, making it particularly challenging to establish and maintain a stable path through the icefall. This shortfall in snow was compounded by higher than average temperatures, which accelerated the melting of the Khumbu Glacier. The warmer weather caused the ice to become more mobile and unpredictable, increasing the risk of serac falls and the widening of crevasses. These conditions created a highly unstable environment, fraught with new and unpredictable hazards that posed significant challenges to even the most experienced climbers and route setters. Trusted routes proved impassable, as the route that the Icefall Doctors had hoped to open led to a dead end. Twice. And while this delay caused some grumbling at base camp, No one was going to take the risk of entering the Khumbu icefall before it was deemed safe. And I mean, why would they? When it was obvious, even the most experienced Sherpas on the mountain were unsure what would happen next. No point rushing to your death, right? So, despite the initial frustration and eagerness to push forward, the collective consensus was to wait for the green light from the icefall doctors, which they later got on April 17th, 10 days later than expected. Once the news came in, the crowd of climbers picked up their equipment and the race to Everest began. Notice how I use this word crowd? Yeah, that's not a coincidence. It's the perfect term to capture the increasing number of climbers flocking to Everest each year, turning a phenomenon that was once a solitary pursuit of mountaineering into something resembling a bustling highway during peak season. Last year, the government issued a disastrous number of permits, 487, which many pointed to as a contributing factor to the numerous incidents on the mountain. This year, the number of permits has been reduced to 388, but even that much remains a crowd. Even with the reduced number of climbers, the narrow pathways and limited optimal weather windows create bottlenecks, particularly at higher camps and crucial segments like the Khumbu Icefall and the Hillary Steppe. These bottlenecks can lead to dangerous delays, increased exposure to harsh conditions in the death zone, and a higher risk of altitude sickness, all of which can turn fatal. Overcrowding also complicates rescue operations. In emergencies, every second counts, and the presence of too many climbers can hinder the swift movement of rescue teams. The environmental impact cannot be overlooked. More climbers mean more waste, more wear on the mountain's fragile trails, and a greater cumulative impact on the local ecology. But the most dangerous consequence of overcrowding is dramatically illustrated in a chilling example from this year's climbing season. Look, words alone here won't do the trick. Let me just show you the video. See that? That's the crowded summit ridge just moments before a cornice collapsed, resulting in a harrowing incident in which 2 climbers plunged to their deaths. The video vividly captures the dangerous conditions created by too many climbers trying to reach the summit at the same time, which not only increases the risk of accidents, but can also delay or complicate rescue efforts when disasters strike. Mala explained the situation in his post. The Everest summit ridge felt different than my previous experiences on the mountain. Mala wrote, "There was soft snow, many cornices and rocky sections covered in snow. The weather station was even half buried in snow. After summiting, we crossed the Hillary Steppe. Traffic was moving slowly, then suddenly a cornice collapsed a few meters ahead of us. There was also a cornice under us. As the cornice collapsed, 4 climbers nearly perished, yet were clipped onto the rope and self-rescued. Sadly, 2 climbers are still missing. The 2 climbers missing are Daniel Paul Peterson, a 40-year-old mountaineer from the UK, and his Nepalese guide, 23-year-old Pastenji Sherpa. At this point, there is tragically no hope of finding both of them alive. The pair likely fell down the Kangchung face of the mountain when the cornice they were on broke away. 3 other climbers were rescued, but Peterson and Pastenji fell towards the Tibetan range where rescue is impossible. A witness reported, "We mobilized 6 Sherpas for the rescue, but could not retrieve them. They were swept away by the rock towards the Tibetan range," he added. Mr. Peterson was known as a fit and experienced climber. "This was his first summit with us," stated Pemba Sherpa, the manager at 8K Expedition. "He was aware of everything about climbing and the challenges. He was physically fit. It's a natural disaster. Who knows what will happen in the mountains? They are unpredictable. We don't know his location. It's a steep slope and they are gone. We have called off the search operation," he said, signaling a grim resolution to a tragic event. Now, while there are certain harsh realities that come with climbing such formidable peaks, I can't quite shake off the feeling that this might not have happened in the first place if the summit hadn't been so overcrowded. And if global warming wasn't a real issue on Everest, but I don't know, I'm not a veteran Mount Everest mountain climber after all. According to sources, a rescue team led by Inga Tenji Sherpa and Pasang Sherpa of summit force, sprang into action when the route broke at the Hillary section, managing to save other climbers caught in a critical situation. Mala's proactive actions in this chaotic scenario might also have saved many lives. We tried to traverse, but it was impossible due to the traffic on the fixed line, Mala explained in his Instagram post. Many climbers were stuck in traffic, and oxygen was running low. I was able to start breaking a new route for the descending traffic to begin moving slowly once again. Mala's third video on Instagram captures the climbers passing after he repaired the route, which is a testament to the quick thinking and resourcefulness required in such extreme conditions. But this situation highlights a recurring issue on Everest, one that can turn an already risky trip into something much more dangerous if left unattended to. But while all these new regulations to clean up Everest preserve the Sherpa economy and protect both climbers and Sherpas, could very well set a new standard not just for Everest, but for major climbing expeditions around the world, it still wouldn't change the dangers of climbing such a formidable peak. Everest, with its extreme altitudes, unpredictable weather, and challenging terrain, remains an inherently risky endeavor. The 2024 season started off with many professionals fearful that we would have a repeat of 2023, with over-eager climbers seeking to reach the summit as fast as possible, and nasty, avoidable tragedies. But thankfully we saw some improved, if not confusing, government regulations designed to cater more for the Sherpas, while also trying to balance safety and awareness at higher elevations. And while there were still some devastating tragedies in 2024, we're grateful to report far fewer deaths than 2023's tragic year. But the reality still remains that the allure of Everest to climbers remains supreme, with more and more people getting interested at taking a shot at climbing the highest mountain in the world. And so the question is, what's next for the king of all mountains? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave. Imagine standing on the icy slopes of a snow-capped mountain. But this is not just any mountain. This is Mount Everest, the highest and most unforgiving peak on Earth. Hidden somewhere far above, beyond the clouds, is the summit. The air around you are so thin that each breath feels like a battle. Your heart races as you feel the biting cold seep through your layers, and your body shivers as the weight of the journey presses down on you. To even get here, you must have spent years preparing, training your body to endure the harshest conditions, and thousands of dollars acquiring gear that could endure the deadliest elements. But it's all worth it because you are about to do what very few women before you have ever done: conquer the highest peak in the world. But Everest doesn't care about your dreams, and the line between triumph and tragedy is razor thin.
I'm doing this thing because I wanted to give a message that follow your dream. You have one life, live your life.
I have reached 6 of the 7 summits, so of course now I have to reach the 7th.
And she says, I'm climbing Mount Everest. And I says, have you lost your mind?
From a climber whose harness failed at the most critical moment, to another who was left behind to face the worst fate imaginable, today's episode uncovers the deadly cost of confronting one of nature's most brutal challenges. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Let's begin with the tragic story of Marty Hoey, an experienced American climber who was on the brink of making history. Marty Hoey was not just a climber. She was a trailblazer, a woman who shattered barriers in the male-dominated world of high-altitude mountaineering. Born in 1951, Marty grew up in Washington State, where the rugged landscapes sparked her love for the outdoors. From a young age, she was drawn to the mountains, and her passion soon turned into a lifelong pursuit of climbing some of the world's most challenging peaks. Marty's early years in mountaineering were marked by a series of significant achievements that quickly established her as one of the leading female climbers of her time. In the 1970s, when women were rarely seen in the upper rank of this sport, Marty was already shattering this glass ceiling, having climbed some of the most challenging peaks in North America and beyond. She was known for her technical skill, endurance, and fearless approach, often tackling routes that many of her male colleagues found intimidating. Her climbing experiences led her to a prominent role at the National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, where she became one of the first female instructors. At NOLS, Marty was a mentor to many aspiring climbers, both men and women. She specialized in high-altitude expeditions, leading teams through the most challenging terrains and sharing her extensive knowledge of mountaineering. Her influence at NOLS helped to pave the way for more women to enter the field, and she became a role model for female climbers everywhere. But Marty's achievements didn't stop there. She was one of the first women to lead expeditions on major peaks like Mount Denali, and was a key figure in several groundbreaking climbs. Her leadership and expertise were widely recognized, and she became known for her ability to remain calm under pressure, which is a vital trait in the unpredictable world of high-altitude climbing. But despite all her accomplishments, Marty had one goal that had always escaped her: summiting Mount Everest, the highest and most famous peak in the world. But in 1982, she finally got a chance to cross that off her list when she was selected to be part of an elite American expedition led by Lou Whitaker. Now, this was not just going to be any expedition. Lou aimed to summit Everest through the West Ridge, one of the most challenging and dangerous routes on the mountain. The West Ridge is known for its technical difficulty, with steep, exposed sections that require climbers to navigate deceiving rock and ice. This route had only been successfully climbed a few times before, which made the expedition's choice of route particularly bold and ambitious. Lou Whitaker was a highly respected American mountaineer, so him leading the expedition was an important victory for American climbers on the world stage. Whitaker had already established his credentials by becoming the first American to summit the North Col route of Everest in 1963. His deep understanding of the mountain and his reputation for leadership and thorough preparation added significant weight to the 1982 expedition. The team Whitaker assembled was composed of some of the most experienced American climbers of the time, one of whom was Marty. If they were successful, that climb would place Marty in the history books as the first American woman to reach the summit of Everest.
I think it's going to be very interesting for everybody as an individual, too. I think that if I am physically and mentally prepared, that I'll have a chance. I think the mountain will determine who will be ready to climb.
The months leading up to the expedition were filled with rough preparation. Marty had trained tirelessly for this climb, pushing her body to its limits to ensure she was ready for the grueling climb. She carefully planned every detail, from her nutrition to the gear she would carry, knowing that on Everest, even the smallest oversight could be deadly. Her experience and attention to detail made her one of the most prepared members of the team. As the expedition progressed, Marty's determination was unshakable. The team faced the usual and expected challenges of Everest: extreme cold, high winds, and the ever-present risk of avalanches. But Marty was in her element, drawing on years of experience to navigate the mountain's treacherous slopes. By mid-May, the team was in a position to make their final push to the summit. Marty was just days away from achieving her dream. This, unfortunately, is where this story takes a dark turn. On May 15, 1982, Marty and the crew were at 26,200 feet on the north face of Mount Everest. Given Everest's peak height of about 29,035 feet, it is very conceivable that a day or two later, she would have stood a very good chance of becoming the first woman to reach the world's highest mountain. But it was not to be. As Marty was trying to navigate the Great Kulwa, a particularly sharp gully high on Everest's north face, a simple yet devastating mistake happened. The buckle on her safety harness came loose. In the thin air and in the middle of the chaotic winds, Marty lost her footing and fell. We can only assume that she didn't double-check the buckle in the heat of the exciting moment. At the time, harnesses had to be manually double-threaded, unlike harnesses today with buckles that automatically lock. In those high altitudes, this simple oversight led to Marty losing her footing and falling. Despite the team's best efforts to save her, Marty fell thousands of feet down the face of the mountain. Her companion Jim Wickwire wrote about the event in his memoir, Addicted to Danger, published in 1998. I heard a sudden pinging sound and turned my head to see Marty pitching backward, head down the icy slope. She rolled onto her side and tried to grab the rope, but slid past it and disappeared into the mist and over a vast ice cliff. Not once, Wickwire wrote, did she cry out. Marty Hoey's death was a devastating blow to the mountaineering community, particularly to the women who had looked up to her as a pioneer in the sport. She had broken through so many barriers, proving that women could not only participate in high-altitude climbing, but also excel at it. Her untimely death was a cruel reminder of the dangers that even the most experienced climbers face on Everest. Following the tragic loss of Marty Hoey in 1982, the lessons of Everest's dangers echoed through the decades, yet the mountain continued to lure female climbers from all corners of the world. Decades after Marty's fall, another determined climber embarked on her own journey up Everest. Like Marty, she was driven by the dream of reaching the summit. This is the story of Australian Maria Stridham. Maria Stridham was an accomplished academic and passionate adventurer with a deep love for the outdoors. Born and raised in South Africa before moving to Australia, Maria was a senior lecturer at Monash University, specializing in finance. Her professional life was marked by intellectual precision, but her personal life was driven by a passion for climbing. Maria and her husband, Robert Gropel, shared a dream of summiting the highest peaks on each continent, a challenge known to climbers as the 7 Summits Challenge. By 2016, they had already conquered 6 of these challenging mountains, with only Mount Everest remaining. For Maria and Robert, reaching the summit of Everest was more than a personal achievement. It was a statement. Both were firm vegans, and they wanted to challenge the misconception that a plant-based diet lacked the necessary nutrients for high-performance activities like mountaineering. By standing on top of the world, they hoped to prove that vegans could not only survive, but also thrive in extreme conditions. This journey was about more than just climbing. The couple arrived in Nepal in April 2016, full of hope and excitement. They joined an international team of climbers, each with their own dreams of reaching the summit. The team began their ascent in May, following the traditional South Col route. This route, though the most popular, also has its own dangers, from the deceitful Khumbu icefall to the bone-chilling winds of the death zone above 26,000 feet. As they ascended, Maria and Robert faced the typical challenges that Everest presents: the biting cold, the thinning air, and the physical exhaustion that comes with high-altitude climbing. Yet, they were well prepared, having spent years training for this moment. The couple moved steadily through the lower camps, acclimatizing as they went. Their spirits were high, and the summit seemed within reach. However, as they climbed higher, Maria began to experience the symptoms of altitude sickness.
She couldn't walk, and the terrain was very difficult. It was very steep and very rocky, and it was very risky.
Altitude sickness, or acute mountain sickness, AMS, occurs when the body is unable to adapt to the lower levels of oxygen available at high altitudes. The higher you go, the thinner the air becomes, and the body struggles to get the oxygen it needs. The first symptoms of AMS are often mild and include headaches, dizziness, nausea, and shortness of breath. These symptoms are common among climbers and can usually be managed with rest and acclimatization. But for some climbers, like Maria, these symptoms can escalate quickly, leading to more severe and life-threatening conditions. As they pushed further into the death zone, Maria's condition worsened. They call it the death zone. It's because oxygen levels are less than a third of what they are at sea level. Her headaches became more intense, and she began to feel increasingly fatigued. The lack of oxygen was taking a toll on her body, and she struggled to catch her breath. This progression is a clear warning sign that the body is not coping with the altitude, and continuing to ascend can be dangerous. Despite her worsening condition, Maria was determined to press on. The summit was provocatively close. She was just 15 minutes away from the summit, and she was unwilling to give up on her dream. However, realizing the seriousness of her condition, Robert and their Sherpa guides urged her to turn back. They knew that continuing could be fatal. But Maria, driven by her determination to reach the top, insisted that Robert continue to the summit without her. She believed she could manage her condition long enough for him to achieve their shared goal. Reluctantly, Robert agreed to her request, and Maria began her descent accompanied by Sherpas. However, as she descended from the South Col, Maria's conditions started to worsen dramatically. Altitude sickness has now progressed to high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE, a severe and life-threatening condition where fluid builds up in the lungs, making it nearly impossible to breathe. HAPE is one of the most dangerous complications of altitude sickness, and it can develop rapidly, particularly in the thin air of the death zone. With each step, each breath became a hard task to tackle, and her energy drained away. The fluid in her lungs slowly suffocated her, and the lack of oxygen caused her body to shut down. Despite the best efforts of the Sherpas to assist her, her body was unable to cope with the extreme altitude. Maria collapsed on the descent. The Sherpas tried desperately to help her, but there was little that could be done. On May 20th, 2016, Maria Stridham died on the slopes of Mount Everest, just hours from the summit she had so long dreamed of. Maria's death sparked a global conversation about the immense pressures that climbers face, particularly those driven by the need to achieve something extraordinary. Maria wanted to break a record, but instead the mountain broke her. But as you know, hers is not the only tale of a climber who came agonizingly close to realizing their dream, only to have it snatched away by the mountain. Just 2 decades earlier, another climber faced a similar fate. Yasuko Namba was a determined and passionate climber from Japan, a woman who had set her sights on conquering the world's highest peaks. Born in 1949 in Tokyo, Yasuko was not your typical mountaineer. She was a businesswoman working as a management consultant for Federal Express in Japan. But beyond the boardrooms and business meetings, she had a deep love for adventure and a relentless drive to push her physical and mental limits. By the time Yasuko decided to tackle Mount Everest, she was already an experienced climber. Her goal was to join the elite group of mountaineers who had completed the 7 Summits Challenge, which is climbing the highest peaks on each of the 7 continents. Everest, the tallest of them all, was to be her crowning achievement. At 47 years old, Yasuko Namba was not only one of the oldest women to attempt Everest, but she was also one of the most determined. Her journey to the summit was the result of years of preparation, training, and successful climbs on other challenging peaks. She had already conquered 6 of the 7 summits, including Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa and Denali in North America. Everest was the final piece of her mountaineering puzzle, the ultimate challenge that would complete her quest. Yasuko joined the 1996 Everest expedition led by Rob Hall, a seasoned mountaineer who had successfully guided many climbers to the summit. The team included experienced climbers, each with their own reasons for taking on the world's highest peak. Yasuko, though quiet and reserved, was firm in her ambition. Her goal was clear: to stand on top of the world and bring pride to her home country of Japan. The expedition began in early May, following the traditional South Col route, the same path taken by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay during the first successful ascent in 1953. It was meant to be a normal routine trip to the peak. It turned out to be, in Hall's words, the worst experience of my life. As the team ascended, they faced the usual challenges of Everest, just like everyone I mentioned so far: extreme cold, fierce winds, and the ever-present threat of altitude sickness. But Yasuko was undeterred. Despite her age and the physical demands of the climb, she kept going, driven by her dream of reaching the summit. On May 10, 1996, after weeks of difficult climbing and acclimatization, Yasuko Namba finally stood on the summit of Mount Everest. She was the oldest woman at the time to achieve this feat, and she had done so with the quiet determination that had defined her entire mountaineering career. What a triumph! Yasuko and the team had spent time on the peak celebrating and enjoying the priceless view. Maybe they spent a little too much time on the peak. As they began their descent, they were caught in one of the deadliest storms in Everest's history. The weather, which had been relatively stable during the ascent, turned suddenly and violently. What began as a clear day quickly transformed into a nightmare as dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them fierce winds and heavy snowfall. The storm was wild, with wind speeds reaching up to 70 miles per hour. The snowfall was so heavy that the trail disappeared. It was nearly impossible for the climbers to see where they were going. The temperature visibility dropped to near zero, creating life-threatening conditions for those still on the slopes. The howling winds cut through the climbers' gear, and the thick snow made every step a battle for survival. Yasuko, already exhausted from the climb and the thin air at such high altitudes, struggled to keep up with the group as they made their way down. The storm intensified, and the climbers found themselves battling not just the mountain, but also the weather. Yasuko, who had pushed her body to its limits to reach the summit, began to waver. Her pace slowed down. She became increasingly disoriented and developed altitude sickness and fatigue. As night fell and the storm raged on, each member of the team was just trying to survive, think of themselves, and save their own lives. She and another climber, Beck,